Today's song is going to be Imagine by John Lennon. And this is from 1971. And Imagine is a well known song. Lots of people know it. So there's more than 600 cover versions of the song. And this will be another one. And if you want to go straight to the music, you can always click on the link in the description below. And then you can skip this whole section where I ramble on. But maybe you might learn something you didn't know if you stick around. So there are more than 600 plus cover versions, I think, of this song. Lots of people have covered it. The jazz singer Sarah Vaughan, Neil Young, Dolly Parton, Madonna, Lady Gaga, who else? Patti LaBelle, Joan Baez. Uh, his son Julian covered this song. So lots of people have covered the song. Very popular song. Very much if you ask people what is that, what for a John Lennon song, this probably would be one that would come up a lot. And if you ask people for, say, the top 100 songs of the 20th century, or most important songs, or maybe the last half of the 20th century, this song will probably be on it. So very much a song that everyone has probably heard once, even if they're just a very casual listener of music. Um, this is a song that a lot of people probably would know. So how did he write the song Imagine? Well, we sort of think we know because of what it's about, based on politics and the like, and his association. But actually, it didn't really come quite that way. So the story sort of touches on some very basic and essential questions of being an artist and what it is. So when in '71 he was married to Yoko Ono, and Yoko was 7 years older than he was when he was alive. And so in '53, she was about 19 or 20. He was still a child. She moved to the United States, went to New York City, and then enrolled in Sarah Lawrence College. And she became, along with that, enmeshed in the art scene of New York City. And she became associated with a group called the New York School. And the New York School was a group of experimental and avant-garde musicians and artists, generally speaking, and with many mediums, not just music. So people like Morton Feldman, musician, Merce Cunningham, choreographer, John Cage, artist and musician of great import in the 20th century, very much a mover and shaker, very much a connection between the beginning of the 20th century. He started with Arnold Schoenberg, beginning of 20th century modern music, and then has a legacy tracing after that to people such as Frank Zappa or the group Radiohead. So he has really a connection between the beginning and the end of the century. Very important artist and musician in the 20th century. And he did things like, just to give you an example of what we're talking about with avant-garde, he did things like he had a piece called 4 minutes and 33 seconds, in which you would assemble a group of musicians, doesn't matter what they played, on a stage and in front of an audience, and they would proceed to not play their instruments for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. What's an artist supposed to do? What is a performer expected to do? Should an audience expect if you're going to do a performance? What does that mean? And what's going to happen? Those are all basic questions. He was very much pushing against that kind of thing of, what is the expectations of an artist, at least at that time in the early 50s. And Yoko sort of fit right into that, because she also, as Sarah Lawrence, she was increasingly experiencing a real conflict between the expectations for an artist at that time, whatever the medium, and herself in terms of what she was trying to do, or what she was groping toward, what she wanted to do. And she, expresses that quite clearly in her own words. And one of the things she did at that time, in that moment where things were difficult, was she kept a manuscript of different ideas, musings, artist thoughts about art, possible things to do, etc. And she would just write them down, really, as she said, not for anyone, but just for herself, as a way to help her stay sane in a very difficult time. And she added to that manuscript over the next 10 years. And eventually, she did actually publish it. She self-published it under the title Grapefruit in Japan in 1964 on July 4th. And she called it her Declaration of Independence Day from the expectations of an artist, at least at that time. And so this work that she did now is considered an early important example of what's called conceptual art, where the concept involved in the work is primary, and the realization of it, or the medium even, is secondary. And her book, instead of having a product, to somehow experience or view, her book had a set of instructions for each what is called an installation. And the instructions, when performed, would be, in some sense, realize the concept of the art, or what was behind the art. And sometimes this is a physical manifestation. You get a tangible product. Sometimes it's really just a conceptual one. It doesn't actually exist in 3D world, but it exists in your mind. And so that was, like I said, conceptual art, and this is one of the early important examples of it. And so what are we talking about? So one example would be, imagine that snow is falling, and think that the snow is falling everywhere. And when you talk with a person, think that there's snow falling between you and the person and on the person. And then stop conversing with the person when you think that person is completely covered with snow. So very much a thought exercise. Or imagine 1,000 suns in the sky at the same time. Let them shine for 1 hour, and then let them gradually melt into the sky. Make one tuna fish sandwich and eat. So these are some of the things that she wrote down in her book entitled Grapefruit. And she published that, and John Lennon read that book. And as you can see throughout there, through those two examples at least, not every single thing in the book is like this, but those two examples, show the idea of imagine, starting off with imagine something. And so Lennon acknowledged that really this was the starting point for Imagine. And her contribution to the song is something that he acknowledged in his own words before he died. He said that what he'd learned through being with Yoko as an artist and his own feelings on it, and reading that book. And he says, if you look at the book all over the place, you see, imagine this, think that, it's all over there. And so he just took that and ran with it in his own direction. He said, it really should have been a John Lennon Yoko Ono song, because her contribution, from his point of view at least, was significant to him writing that song. To put that very idea in his head, just suppose you could imagine, what would you imagine, kind of a thing. So that's him, how he wrote that song, Imagine. Now I'm going to do it on the piano, obviously. And one other thing you may not know was that if you watch the films for the song Imagine that Lennon made, you'll see him playing a piano, grand piano, in his living room where they were at the time, where the studio was. And that actually isn't the piano you hear on the song. So they did try to record that piano that you see, but actually they didn't like the sound. It just didn't, the way they were recording it, what they were getting, they just didn't like it. So with the sound, the piano sound you hear on the recording actually is an upright piano in the studio, rather than the one that's in sort of his living room. And if you listen to the song, if you know anything about the sounds of pianos, if you play the piano, if you played upright versus a grand, you probably were thinking to yourself, that sounds a little funny for a grand piano. Because an upright piano definitely has a different sound. It's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be starkly different, but it definitely has, if nothing else, a subtly different quality to the sound. But because of the way it's made, an upright piano has hammers and that go vertically rather than horizontally for a grand. And so when you hit a key, the mechanism is a bit different in terms of how things strike and where they are. And so you end up with a sound that isn't quite the same. You get more of a clunk to it because of the way the hammer noise comes out. Also because when you mic an upright, it's different than miking a grand. So you pick things up a bit differently, and it just sounds different. You get more of, like I said, more of a hammer noise that just has a different quality to it. And you can hear it in the song when you listen to it, especially in the beginning when it's just the piano. You can certainly hear that a certain clunkiness to the sound in there. So the song itself, like I said, has that piano is the piano in it. They also filled it out with bass and drums and strings. But if you take all that away and just play the piano part, you're there. I mean, that's basically the song. Even if you take everything away, it's still, the piano part itself just makes the song. So that's what I'm playing. I'm playing essentially the piano part of the song itself. I added a few little things just to sort of fill it out because they don't have the bass, the drums, and the strings. So but nonetheless, it's the piano part is it. Once you play that, you're there. Difference would be that since it's on the grand piano, it's going to sound a little bit smoother than it would on the actual recording. It won't be quite as percussive in that sense, I don't think. But anyways, so that is your little preamble, and so now we will hear my version of John Lennon's Imagine. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world